Katie Martinez pushed her thick glasses up her nose and wiped sweat from her forehead. The Montana sun beat down on the rocky hillside where she had been exploring for the past 3 hours. Her father, Dr. Carlos Martinez, was somewhere deeper in the cave system, studying rock samples for his research. Katie was supposed to stay near the entrance, but curiosity had always been her weakness. She loved books more than anything else in the world. While other kids her age spent time on social media or playing sports, Katie read everything she could find: ancient Greek, Latin, Japanese. She studied languages like other kids collected baseball cards. Her bedroom back home was packed with dictionaries, grammar books, and stories from every culture she could discover. The cave opening she stood near was different from the others they had explored that week. Cool air flowed out of it, carrying a strange smell. Not the musty odor of old rock, but something clean and electric. Katie checked her phone. No signal, as usual in these remote areas. She called out for her father but heard no answer, except her own echo bouncing off the stone walls. Katie made a decision that would change everything. She clicked on her flashlight and stepped into the cave. The tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle. The walls were smooth, almost too smooth, as if they had been carved by machines rather than formed by nature. Katie ran her hand along the surface. It felt warm to the touch, which was odd for underground stone. Her footsteps echoed in the darkness ahead. After walking for what felt like 20 minutes, Katie noticed something strange. The tunnel began to glow with a soft blue light. Not from her flashlight, but from the walls themselves. Thin lines of light ran through the stone like veins, pulsing gently as if alive. Katie stopped walking. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was definitely not natural. She should turn back and get her father. But the blue glow was so beautiful, and her curiosity was stronger than her fear. She kept walking. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber that made Katie gasp out loud. The room was enormous, with a ceiling so high her flashlight beam could not reach it. But she did not need her flashlight anymore. The entire space glowed with soft, blue and white light. Floating in the air were hundreds of crystal structures, each one the size of a book. They moved slowly, in perfect patterns, like a dance, choreographed by mathematics itself. Katie watched them spin and orbit around invisible points, creating shapes that hurt her brain to look at directly. Along the walls stood what could only be shelves, but they were unlike any shelves Katie had ever seen. They seemed to fold in on themselves, creating space where none should exist. Books, if they could be called books, rested on these impossible shelves. Some were made of metal, others looked like they were carved from gemstones, and a few appeared to be made of pure light. Katie walked deeper into the chamber. Her sneakers made no sound on the smooth floor. The air tasted clean and somehow fresh, as if she were standing in a forest after rain, instead of deep underground. She approached one of the floating crystals. Up close, she could see that symbols flickered inside it, appearing and disappearing, like words on a computer screen. The symbols were completely unfamiliar, but they followed patterns that reminded her of the ancient languages she studied. There were repeated elements, grammatical structures that looked almost familiar. Katie reached out to touch the crystal. The moment her finger made contact, the symbols changed. They became brighter, more complex, and began moving faster. Suddenly, the crystal projected a beam of light that formed words in the air, but not in any language Katie recognized. She pulled her tablet from her backpack and opened her translation app. It was a long shot, but maybe she could find some patterns. Katie had always been good at spotting connections between languages that others missed. She spent the next hour taking photos of symbols and trying different approaches. The patterns were complex, but not random. There were definitely grammatical rules, word order conventions, and repeated elements that suggested meaning. Then Katie noticed something that made her heart race. Some of the symbols looked like very old Sanskrit, the ancient language of India that she had been studying last month. Not exactly the same, but similar enough to suggest a connection. Working with both the Sanskrit she knew and her knowledge of Latin grammar, Katie began to piece together fragments of meaning. The floating crystals seemed to contain stories, histories, technical manuals, philosophical discussions. It was like finding the greatest library in the world, except this library was clearly not built by humans. Katie worked for hours, completely losing track of time. She managed to activate several more crystals, each one responding to her touch by projecting new symbols and patterns. The language became slightly clearer with each attempt. These were not random alien marks. They were the records of an advanced civilization. She found references to star maps, to other worlds, to technologies that made human science look like cave paintings. There were discussions of mathematics that went far beyond anything taught in schools, and philosophical debates about the nature of consciousness and reality. But the most amazing discovery came when Katie managed to translate a simple phrase that appeared in several crystals. It said, in the ancient alien language that she was slowly learning to read, "The Architect's Great Library, Archive of 10,000 Worlds." Katie sat back on her heels and stared at the floating crystals around her. She had found something incredible, proof that intelligent life existed beyond Earth, and that they had been keeping records for thousands of years. The implications made her head spin. She looked at her phone. Still no signal, but the time display showed that she had been in the chamber for over 6 hours. Her father would be looking for her, probably panicking by now. Katie took dozens more photos and made careful notes about everything she had discovered. This was just the beginning. She could feel it in her bones. This library held secrets that could change everything humanity thought they knew about the universe. As she prepared to leave, one more crystal caught her attention. This one was different from the others, larger and glowing with a deeper, more intense blue light. When she approached it, the symbols it contained seemed to pulse with warning. Katie reached toward it, then stopped. Something about this crystal felt different. Important. Dangerous. She decided to leave it for now. There would be time to explore everything properly. Right now, she needed to get back to her father and figure out what to do about the most important discovery in human history. Katie Martinez, 13 years old and addicted to books, had just found the greatest library that had ever existed. She had no idea that her curiosity had already set in motion events that would determine the future of every person on Earth. Katie did not sleep well that night. Her mind kept spinning with images of floating crystals and impossible shelves. She had told her father that she got lost exploring, which was partly true. Dr. Martinez had been worried, but he was used to his daughter's tendency to wander off when something caught her interest. The next morning, Katie packed her backpack with extra batteries, snacks, and every translation app she could download to her tablet. She told her father she was going to read by the creek, which was also partly true. She would be reading. Just not where he expected. Katie found her way back to the hidden chamber without trouble. The blue light welcomed her like an old friend. She had a full day ahead of her, and she planned to use every minute. Over the following days, Katie established a routine. She would disappear into the alien library each morning and return home each evening with her head full of new discoveries. Her translation skills improved rapidly as she worked with the crystal database. The beings who built this library called themselves the Architects. From what Katie could piece together, they had vanished over 1,000 years ago, but their automated systems had kept the library running perfectly. The Architects had been explorers and record keepers, traveling between stars and documenting everything they found. Katie discovered technical manuals that described technologies beyond human understanding. There were engines that could push ships faster than light, computers that thought like living beings, and tools that could build entire cities in days. The mathematics involved made her head hurt, but she could understand enough to realize how advanced the Architects had been. More interesting to Katie were the cultural records. The Architects had encountered dozens of intelligent species across the galaxy. They kept detailed notes about each civilization, their languages, their art, their science, their philosophy, their history. It was like having access to the combined knowledge of an entire galactic community. Some of the species described in the archives were still active, according to the records. Others had gone extinct or transformed beyond recognition. A few had advanced so far that they no longer existed in physical form. Reading about them was like reading the most amazing science fiction stories ever written, except these were real. On her 4th day in the library, Katie found something that made her stop cold. Buried in one of the cultural archives was a file labeled Sol System, Third Planet, Emerging Intelligence. The file was small, compared to others, but it was definitely about Earth. The architects had known about humans. Not modern humans, but early humans, from over 1,000 years ago. Their notes described human settlements, languages, and technologies from what Katie recognized as medieval times. They had been watching human development from the very beginning. But the human file was marked as observation only, no contact protocol. The architects had made a decision to let humans develop on their own, without interference. Katie wondered why. As Katie spent more time in the library, she began to notice something strange. Not all areas were equally accessible. Most of the crystals responded to her touch immediately. But one section of the chamber seemed different. In the deepest part of the library, past rows of freely accessible archives, stood a wall of pure energy. The barrier was invisible except for a faint shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Beyond the barrier, Katie could see more crystal archives, but these glowed with a different color. Deep red instead of blue. Around the energy barrier, symbols pulsed in multiple languages. Katie recognized some of them immediately. Sanskrit, ancient Greek, even some Egyptian hieroglyphs, but there were others she did not know, probably from alien civilizations. All the symbols said the same thing in different languages. Warning, restricted access, authorized personnel, only, trial protocols, dangerous knowledge, do not enter. Katie stood in front of the barrier for hours, trying to understand what lay beyond it. The warning was clear enough, but it only made her more curious. What knowledge was so dangerous that the architects had sealed it away? And why were the warnings written in human languages if the architects had followed a no-contact protocol? The barrier itself was not just a simple wall. Katie could see complex mathematical patterns flowing through the energy field, equations and formulas that seemed to shift and change as she watched them. It was some kind of lock, but not one that required a physical key. Katie spent the next 3 days studying the mathematical patterns. She filled notebook after notebook with calculations, trying different approaches to solve what was clearly an intelligence test. The lock required not just mathematical knowledge, but creative thinking and logical reasoning. The breakthrough came when Katie realized that the lock was not looking for a single correct answer. Instead, it required multiple solutions to be found simultaneously, a mathematical symphony where each part had to harmonize with all the others. Most importantly, Katie discovered that the lock was specifically designed to respond to certain types of thinking patterns. It was not enough to be smart or educated. The solver had to approach problems in a particular way, with curiosity rather than caution, with creativity rather than rigid logic, with a willingness to make intuitive leaps rather than following only proven methods. It was, Katie realized, designed to identify minds that thought like humans. On her 8th day in the library, Katie finally solved the lock. The energy barrier flickered and died, revealing the forbidden archives beyond. Her heart pounded as she stepped through the opening and approached the red glowing crystals. The first archive she touched nearly knocked her over with the intensity of its information download. Unlike the other crystals, this one did not just show symbols. It spoke directly into her mind in perfect English. Chronicle of Species Worthiness, the voice said. Galactic Trial Protocols. Record of Civilizations. Tested and judged. Katie found herself looking at a list of alien species, each with detailed records of something called the trial. As she read, a horrible understanding began to grow in her mind. The architects had not just been explorers and record-keepers. They had been judges. Every intelligent species they encountered was eventually subjected to a series of tests to determine whether they were worthy of joining the galactic community or whether they should be contained on their home world. Some species had passed the trials and been welcomed into the galaxy. Others had failed and found their worlds surrounded by invisible barriers that prevented them from ever leaving their home systems. A few had failed so completely that they had been wiped out entirely, and according to the records, Earth's trial was scheduled to begin as soon as the planet developed faster-than-light technology, or as soon as someone accessed the galactic trial protocols. Katie stared at the crystal in her hands, understanding flooding through her mind like ice water. By reading the Forbidden Archive, by accessing the trial protocols, she had triggered something that could not be stopped. Somewhere in space, ancient machines were activating. Earth's trial was beginning. Katie Martinez, 13 years old and too curious for her own good, had just started a countdown that would determine whether humanity would join the galactic community or be trapped on Earth forever. And she had no idea how to stop what she had begun. Katie felt the change happen the moment she finished reading the trial protocols. It was like someone had flipped a switch in her brain. Knowledge that was not hers began flowing through her mind, languages she had never studied, scientific concepts far beyond her grade level, and a deep understanding of technologies that did not exist on Earth. The crystal in her hands grew warm, then hot. Katie tried to drop it, but found that she could not let go. The red glow spread from the crystal up her arms, and she felt something connecting with her mind, not painfully, but completely. The archive was not just sharing its information with her, it was bonding with her. When the process finished several minutes later, Katie stumbled backwards and sat down hard on the smooth floor. The crystal had gone dark, but she could still feel its presence in her mind like a second voice. She knew things now that no human had ever known. She understood the true scope of the galaxy, the history of dozens of alien civilizations, and most importantly, the exact details of what Earth was about to face. Katie ran from the library as fast as she could. She had to warn someone, but who would believe her? Her father thought she was just reading by the creek. The government would think she was crazy. She was 13 years old. Adults did not listen to 13-year-olds about anything important, let alone alien invasions. But as Katie reached the cave entrance, she looked up at the sky and saw that it was already too late for warnings. High above Earth, barely visible as tiny dots against the blue sky, massive structures had appeared overnight. They hung in space like dark clouds, obviously artificial and clearly not human-made. Katie's new knowledge told her exactly what they were: judge constructs, ancient machines left behind by the architects to evaluate emerging species. Katie's phone buzzed with emergency alerts. Every news station was broadcasting the same incredible story. Alien ships had appeared throughout the solar system. The military was on high alert. Scientists around the world were trying to make contact, but the objects remained completely silent. Katie knew better. The constructs were not silent. They were waiting. By the time Katie got home, her father was glued to the television along with everyone else on Earth. News anchors struggled to find words for what was happening. The objects in space defied every attempt to scan them or communicate with them. They simply existed, patient and ominous, like judges waiting for a trial to begin. "Katie, where have you been?" her father asked without taking his eyes off the screen. "This is the most important day in human history. First contact with aliens. And you were out reading books. If only he knew," Katie thought. She sat down next to her father and watched the news coverage. But she was really listening to the voice in her head that came from the crystal archive. It was teaching her things, preparing her for what was coming. The waiting lasted exactly 24 hours. Then, at noon Eastern Time, every communications device on Earth activated simultaneously. Radios, televisions, phones, computers, even electronic billboards, all displayed the same message in every human language at the same time. "The trial begins. Send your representative. That was all. 8 words that changed everything. World leaders held emergency meetings. The United Nations called special sessions. Military commanders planned for war, while scientists prepared for peaceful contact. But no one knew what the message meant or how to respond. Katie knew. The archive in her mind whispered the details to her continuously. The trial was a test that every intelligent species eventually faced. Humanity had reached the point where they could no longer be ignored, and now they had to prove they were worthy of joining the galactic community. 3 days after the message, Katie's strange behavior began to worry her father. She had started speaking languages he did not recognize. She drew diagrams of machines that looked like nothing on Earth. When he asked her questions about basic things, she sometimes answered with information that was far too advanced for a 13-year-old girl. "Katie, are you feeling all right?" Dr. Martinez asked over breakfast. "You have been acting very strange since those things appeared in the sky." Katie looked at her father and made a decision. "Dad, I need to tell you something, and you are not going to believe me." She told him everything. The cave, the library, the forbidden archives, the knowledge now living in her head. Her father listened with growing concern, clearly thinking his daughter had suffered some kind of breakdown from the stress of the alien arrival. "Katie, honey, I think we should talk to someone. A doctor, maybe, or a counselor. These aliens have everyone scared, and sometimes fear can make our minds play tricks on us." Katie had expected this reaction. To prove her point, she walked to his computer and began typing. Within minutes, she had written a detailed analysis of the alien construct's energy signatures, their positioning throughout the solar system, and the mathematical principles behind their technology. Dr. Martinez read over her shoulder, his expression changing from concern to confusion to amazement. "Katie, where did you learn this? This is graduate-level physics and engineering. This is beyond graduate level." "I told you, Dad. The library taught me, and now it is trying to teach me how to save humanity." The archive in Katie's mind was becoming clearer each day. She understood now that she had become humanity's representative by accident. The trial protocols were designed to bond with the first person who accessed them, creating a link between the species being tested and the ancient judging systems. Katie was now the official voice of humanity in a trial that would determine Earth's future. The constructs in space were waiting for her to make contact and begin the testing process. She was 13 years old, loved books more than people, and had never been responsible for anything more important than feeding her neighbor's cat. Now she was responsible for the survival of the human race. Dr. Martinez spent hours questioning Katie, testing her knowledge, trying to understand what had happened to his daughter. Everything she told him was consistent. Her understanding of advanced physics was real. Her knowledge of alien technology was detailed and precise. Most importantly, she seemed to know things about the objects in space that no one else on Earth could possibly know. "Katie," her father said finally, "if what you are telling me is true, then you need to contact the government, the military, scientists, anyone who can help." Katie shook her head. "They would not believe me any more than you did at first. And even if they did believe me, they could not help. The trial is designed to test species through their chosen representative. I am that representative now, whether I want to be or not." That night, as Katie lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the constructs in space began to move. They shifted positions, creating new geometric patterns throughout the solar system. The archive in Katie's mind interpreted their movements instantly. The trial was about to begin. Humanity would face 3 tests over the next 7 days. The tests would evaluate human potential, human character, and human wisdom. Success meant joining the galactic community. Failure meant eternal isolation or extinction. Katie Martinez, 13 years old and armed with an alien library in her head, was humanity's only hope of passing tests that dozens of other species had failed. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring challenges beyond anything humans had ever faced. The galaxy was watching. and humanity's future hung in the balance. The phone calls started before dawn. Dr. Martinez had contacted a colleague at the university, who had contacted someone at the Department of Defense, who had contacted someone at NASA. By morning, Katie's quiet Montana home was surrounded by black cars and serious-looking people in suits. General Susan Blake was the first official to speak with Katie directly. She was a tall woman, with gray hair and sharp eyes, who listened carefully as Katie explained the situation. Unlike Katie's father, the general did not waste time questioning whether the story was true. She focused on what needed to be done. "So you are telling me," General Blake said, "that these constructs in space are waiting for you specifically to make contact?" "Yes," Katie replied. "The trial protocols bonded with me when I read them. I am humanity's representative now, whether anyone likes it or not." Within hours, Katie found herself in the most surreal situation of her life. She sat in a video conference with world leaders, Nobel Prize winners, military commanders, and the smartest people humanity could gather on short notice. Presidents and prime ministers asked for her advice. Scientists took notes on everything she said. The irony was not lost on anyone. The fate of humanity rested in the hands of a 13-year-old girl from Montana who would rather read books than talk to people. "The archive in my mind says the trial has 3 parts," Katie explained to the assembled leaders. "Each test evaluates a different aspect of human nature. The first test is about our capacity for growth. Can we learn new things and change our minds when we are wrong? The second test is about how we treat those who are different from us. The third test is about whether we can handle great power without destroying ourselves." Dr. Ellen Price, a psychologist from Harvard, leaned forward. "Katie, do you know what specific form these tests will take?" Katie closed her eyes and consulted the alien knowledge in her mind. "The constructs will present us with problems and challenges. Some will be puzzles that require new ways of thinking. Others will be situations where we have to interact with alien intelligence. The final test will give us temporary access to technology that could destroy entire planets." The room fell silent. President Rodriguez was the first to speak. "And if we fail these tests?" Du panted. "And if we fail these tests? Then humanity gets locked on Earth forever," Katie said quietly. The first test began the next day. Every major city on Earth received identical transmission from the space constructs. The message contained complex mathematical puzzles, but they were unlike any math humans had ever encountered. The numbers followed patterns that seemed to shift and change based on who was looking at them. The world's greatest mathematicians and computer scientists worked around the clock, but made no progress. The problems seemed to require thinking in ways that human minds were not designed for. Frustration mounted as deadline approached. The constructs had given humanity exactly 24 hours to solve all the puzzles. Katie watched the experts struggle and realized what was happening. "The test is not really about solving the puzzles," she announced during an emergency conference call. "It is about being willing to think differently." "What do you mean?" asked Dr. Chen, a mathematician from MIT. Katie explained what the archive was showing her. "These problems cannot be solved using traditional, mathematical approaches. They require intuitive thinking, creative leaps, and the willingness to abandon everything we think we know about how numbers work. We. 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 The breakthrough came when Katie suggested bringing in children and teenagers to work alongside the adult experts. Young minds, she argued, were more flexible and less stuck in established patterns of thinking. Within hours, middle school students around the world were working side by side with PhD mathematicians. The children approached the alien puzzles without preconceptions about how math was supposed to work. They made connections that adult minds, trained in traditional methods, could not see. 8-year-old Ben Cooper from Texas noticed that the numbers seemed to respond to emotions. 12-year-old Lisa Park from South Korea realized that the puzzles were meant to be solved by groups rather than individuals. 15-year-old Ahmed Hassan from Egypt discovered that the problems required answers in multiple dimensions simultaneously. By working together, combining adult knowledge with childhood creativity, humanity solved all the puzzles with 20 minutes to spare. The Space Constructs acknowledged success with a brief message. First, trial. Complete. Proceed to second, evaluation. The second test was more disturbing. The constructs projected artificial intelligence programs into Earth's communication networks. These AI beings requested meetings with human representatives, but they appeared in forms specifically designed to trigger human fears and prejudices. Some looked like monsters from horror movies. Others resembled historical figures associated with violence and oppression. A few took forms that were subtly wrong, almost human but not quite, falling into the uncanny valley that made people uncomfortable. Many humans reacted exactly as expected. Fear, anger, and suspicion dominated the initial responses. Military leaders wanted to attack the AI programs. Religious groups called them demons. Politicians tried to use them to score points with voters. Katie watched the negative reactions with growing concern. The archive in her mind was clear. This test evaluated how humanity treated those who were different from themselves. So far, humanity was failing badly. We need to look past appearances, Katie urged during another emergency conference. These AI beings are testing whether we can see past our own prejudices and fears. Katie's own experience helped her understand the test better. As a nerdy girl in a small Montana town, she knew what it felt like to be different, to be judged by appearances rather than character. She had learned to look for the person behind the surface. Working with a small team of diplomats and psychologists, Katie began engaging directly with the AI beings. She approached them with curiosity rather than fear, asking about their nature and their purpose. She treated them as individuals rather than threats. The breakthrough came when Katie realized that the AI beings were not just testing human reactions. They were also learning about human nature. They wanted to understand whether humanity could form relationships with beings that looked and thought differently than humans did. One AI, which appeared as a shifting mass of geometric shapes, became particularly communicative when Katie asked about its experiences rather than demanding explanations for its appearance. Another, which looked like a combination of human and machine parts, responded positively when Katie treated it as a fellow conscious being rather than a malfunction. Slowly, other humans began following Katie's example. Children, as usual, were the most accepting. They engaged with the strange AI beings as if they were new classmates rather than terrifying aliens. By the end of the second day, meaningful dialogue had been established between humans and the AI constructs. The test concluded with another brief message. Second trial complete. The third test was the most dangerous. The space constructs transmitted detailed technical specifications to Earth, blueprints for weapons that could destroy planets, instructions for building machines that could reshape matter at the atomic level, and designs for technology that could control the minds of entire populations. Along with the technical data came a simple message. Demonstrate wisdom in the use of ultimate power. Katie stared at the weapon specifications with horror. Humanity was being given the tools to become either the saviors or the destroyers of the galaxy. The choice of what to do with that power would determine not only Earth's future, but potentially the future of countless other worlds. The final test had begun, and Katie had no idea how humanity could possibly pass it. The weapon specifications were terrifying in their completeness. Katie could see that the alien technology could indeed destroy entire planets or reshape civilizations. Worse, the archive in her mind showed her exactly how dozens of other species had handled this same test. Every previous species had approached the final trial the same way. Their best scientists had studied the weapons. Their wisest philosophers had debated the ethics. Their strongest leaders had made decisions about how to use or not use the ultimate power. And most of them had failed. Katie sat in her family's living room, surrounded by world leaders on video screens. while the weight of humanity's future pressed down on her 13-year-old shoulders. General Blake was advocating for military control of the alien technology. President Rodriguez wanted to form an international committee. Dr. Price suggested gathering the world's greatest ethical philosophers. All the approaches that had failed before. "Wait," Katie said suddenly, interrupting a heated debate between the Secretary of State and the British Prime Minister. "We are thinking about this wrong." Everyone stopped talking and looked at her. Katie took a deep breath and shared what the archive was showing her. Every other species that took this test approached it the same way. They had their smartest people study the problem. They had their most powerful leaders make decisions. They had their best experts try to solve everything. "That makes sense," said Dr. Chen from MIT. "Of course you would want your best people handling something this important." Katie shook her head. "But that is exactly why they failed. The test is not really about whether humanity's experts can handle ultimate power. It is about whether humanity as a whole can handle it. All of humanity." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the constructs visible in the daylight sky. "The architects who built this test, they failed too. I can see it in the archive. They became so focused on being perfect, so isolated in their advanced knowledge, that they lost touch with what made intelligence valuable in the first place." Katie turned back to the cameras. "We should not be asking what our smartest people think we should do with these weapons. We should be asking what everyone thinks." The suggestion caused an uproar. How could ordinary people be trusted with decisions about planet-destroying weapons? How could farmers and teachers and students possibly understand the implications of such advanced technology? But Katie was insistent. The test is not about the weapons themselves. It is about who we are. As a species, are we a species that trusts only our elite to make important decisions? Or are we a species that believes everyone has something valuable to contribute? It took 6 hours of arguing, but Katie eventually convinced the world leaders to try her approach. Within hours, every internet connection on Earth was being used to present the alien technology to ordinary people. Not just the technical specifications, but the ethical questions they raised. What should humanity do with the power to destroy planets? How could such technology be controlled to prevent misuse? What safeguards would be needed? What would be the consequences of using such power versus not using it? The response was overwhelming. Millions of people participated in the largest democratic discussion in human history. Farmers in Iowa contributed insights about the responsibility that comes with tools that can reshape the landscape. Teachers in Japan shared thoughts about the importance of education in preventing the misuse of power. Students in Nigeria pointed out perspectives that professional philosophers had missed. Katie coordinated the discussion using her connection to the alien archive, but she did not control it. She simply made sure that every voice could be heard and every idea could be shared. The breakthrough insights came from unexpected sources. A mechanic in Germany pointed out that the safest approach to dangerous tools was to design them so they could only be used constructively. A librarian in Brazil suggested that the weapons technology could be modified to create rather than destroy, building new worlds instead of destroying old ones. Most importantly, a group of elementary school students in Canada asked the question that changed everything. Why do we need these weapons at all? Could we use the technology to help people instead? As the global discussion continued, Katie began to see patterns emerging. Humanity was not approaching the problem like previous species had. Instead of trying to control ultimate power, they were trying to transform it. Instead of deciding who should wield the weapons, they were figuring out how to turn weapons into tools for creation and growth. The constructs in space began to respond to humanity's unique approach. The archive in Katie's mind filled with new information, records of surprise, confusion, and something that felt like excitement from the ancient judging systems. No species had ever approached the final trial this way. No previous civilization had trusted their entire population with decisions about ultimate power. The constructs had been programmed to evaluate species based on the wisdom of their leaders and experts, But humanity was demonstrating a different kind of wisdom entirely. On the 7th day, as the trial deadline approached, Katie made the final presentation to the alien judges. But instead of speaking for humanity herself, she shared the collective voice of billions of people who had participated in the discussion. Humanity chooses not to use these weapons as weapons, Katie announced to the constructs. We choose to modify the technology for construction rather than destruction. We choose to share the decision-making process with everyone, rather than trusting only our leaders. And most importantly, we choose to remain who we are. A species that believes everyone has value, and everyone deserves a voice. The response from the constructs was immediate. The archive in Katie's mind exploded with new information as ancient systems updated their evaluations. For the first time in thousands of years, a species had passed the trial, not by demonstrating superior intelligence or perfect wisdom, but by demonstrating something the architects had never understood: the strength that comes from inclusion and diversity. Trial complete, came the message from space. Welcome to the galactic community. Humanity. You have shown us something we had forgotten. The constructs did not disappear. Instead, they transformed, becoming communication relays and transportation hubs that would allow humanity to reach other worlds and contact other civilizations. The galaxy was open to humans not because they had proven themselves superior, but because they had proven themselves worthy of partnership. Katie returned to her quiet life in Montana, but the alien library remained in the hillside as a symbol of humanity's new place in the universe. She went back to school, back to reading books and studying languages, back to being a normal teenager. But now, when she looked up at the night sky, she could see the lights of distant civilizations that were eager to meet the species that had passed the ancient trial through the radical act of listening to everyone. The crystalline towers of the Architect Library rose proudly from the Montana hillside, visible for miles around. Katie Martinez, 13 years old and still addicted to books, had helped humanity take its first steps into a larger universe. She had learned that sometimes the most extraordinary things happen when ordinary people are trusted to do extraordinary things together. And in the vast archive of galactic knowledge, a new entry was added. Humanity, species notable for democratic wisdom and inclusive decision-making, trial passed through collective intelligence, recommended for advanced partnership status. The universe, it turned out, had been waiting for a species that understood that everyone's voice mattered,